The Dawn Through the Night by GerrysJackie, Chapter 21. As proof that God was on her side, nature supplied the next page in Christine's seductive manual the following weekend. The day had been cloudy and dreary, causing everyone to feel the effects very profusely. Evening rolled around and the rain began to fall around 9 p.m. It was a cool, steady rainfall, normal for late September, which supplied an even tempo to lull the residents into a deep sleep. Christine loved the rain and watched it fall to the ground and bounce back, making little puddles on the cobblestone walkway in front of the estate. It was dark, but the lanterns lit the evening sky just enough to allow her to watch. "The clouds look rather threatening, don't they?" Eric said as he walked out onto the portico. The night sky had rolling, gray-green clouds that loomed ominously over the earth. Eric sat down on a chair and just watched the storm brewing. Christine turned from her observation of the rain and looked at Eric. He looked unusually relaxed and content. He had just taken a bath, his hair was hanging wet, and he only wore a cotton long-sleeve shirt and simple slacks. She didn't respond to his words about the clouds, choosing to ignore their predictable pattern. She was staring intently at her wedding ring, watching the diamonds twinkle in the lantern lights. Eric mistook her faraway gaze as one of sadness for the prison of a marriage into which she had been cast. His heart tugged at his chest, and he swallowed the ball in his throat. "I promise it won't be much longer, Christine," Eric quietly stated. "I just want to wait the proper amount of time to ensure that all the paperwork is in order." She looked at him and furrowed her brow, not quite understanding what he was referring to. Then it came to her. "Eric, I don't want an annulment. I don't want to leave. I've made a home here." Her eyes were full of unshed tears. Eric was taken aback by her words. "We agreed when we married." Christine started shaking her head before he finished his sentence. "We?" she said with surprise. "There was no we in that decision, Eric." Eric raised his chin in question as she continued. "You are so used to making all the decisions that concern you and your household, but you did not take into consideration my thoughts on the situation." Eric was dumbfounded. "Of course, I'm sorry, I just assumed." She pleasantly huffed at his words. "Eric, this is my life too. I love this house. I love the land it sits on." She thought about confessing her love for him, but thought better of it at this moment. "Everything and everyone I love is here." Eric shook his head and watched as she went back into the house. He was doomed to remain in a loveless marriage. Well, she didn't love him anyway. He couldn't blame her for wanting the security and stability of a marriage, but he never thought she would wish to remain in such close proximity to him. It wasn't long after Christine went back into the house that Sam came out onto the portico to smoke his pipe. Eric turned and greeted him. "Is something troubling you, Master Eric?" Sam asked, after seeing the hurt in his eyes. Eric looked at the older man and wondered if he dare share with him what was lurking in the deep recesses of his mind. "Christine does not want an annulment," he said flatly. Sam smiled, knowing what that meant, but he had promised not to say a word. Neither man was aware of Christine as she stood just inside the door. She had forgotten her shawl lying on the outside furniture. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but she couldn't help herself. "And this is a bad thing?" Sam asked. Eric stood and walked toward the pounding rain. "I go through every minute of every day in a constant state of sexual tension with her in the house. Now I will have to endure it for an unprecedented amount of time." He shook his head in frustration. "It is not a pleasant feeling, and it's very embarrassing." Sam was not shocked at the subject. He had told Eric long ago he could talk with him about anything. "I really only have 3 options. I can ease my frustrations with a prostitute, I can take care of it myself, or I can have myself surgically neutered," Eric stated with no emotion in his voice. Sam did not know what to say to that. "Master?" Eric did not even hear Sam. "A prostitute is out of the question. Even if she doesn't love me, I will not cheat on her." "The surgery? No," he grimaced. "That only leaves one." Christine moved from the door and slipped into the parlor. She watched as Eric walked past her and headed upstairs to his room. She was surprised to hear that he was experiencing the same sexually charged agony that she was experiencing. For some reason, she was very happy about that. When she had heard the choices Eric was considering, she'd held her breath. He couldn't go to a prostitute. He just couldn't. The thought of him relieving it himself was enticing and slightly forbidden, but she found she was intrigued. The other suggestion scared her to death. She waited until he slipped into his room and then headed up the stairs to her room. This was going to be a very long night with the pictures she had moving through her head. As the night progressed, the rain became more forceful and a major thunderstorm brewed in the clouds. The gray-green color of the sky only added to the ferocity of the situation. By 3 a.m., the storm had descended upon planet Earth and caused a rather large and loud symphony of clapping thunder. Christine startled out of her deep sleep with a loud scream. She was trembling with the covers pulled over her when Eric threw the door open and ran to her. "What's wrong, Christine?" When she didn't answer, Eric ran to the bed and leaned over her. Christine reached up and wrapped her trembling arms around his strong neck, pulling him down into her embrace. She didn't say a word, she just wanted his protective strength to engulf her. She was clad only in a sheer nightgown, her ample breasts teasing him through the material with their promise of pleasure. "Christine," he asked again, "are you all right?" She shook her head no and finally found her voice. "I'm terrified of thunderstorms," she finally admitted, each word shaking with the force of her fear. Eric closed his eyes to the unmitigated desire that rippled through him. He fought the urge to rip the clothes from her body and claim its sweet paradise for himself. She felt so yielding and vulnerable in his arms, with her body molded perfectly to his, and her pouting, kissable mouth just inches from his. He placed her back down on the bed and tried to pry her arms from around his neck. She had a death hold on him, from which he was having a hard time dislodging himself. "My dear, you have to let go of me in order to get any sleep," Eric stated. His words were only succeeding in her pulling him more tightly. He fell onto the bed, having lost his footing on the floor. "Don't leave me, Eric," she pleaded in a small, helpless voice. What was he going to do now? She pleaded with him to lie beside her and hold her in his safe, strong arms, but Eric knew that she should be running out of the room in fear of him. "What is it you wish me to do?" he inquired. She pulled closer to him, something Eric had thought was impossible. He could feel the peaks of her breasts resting against his chest. He eased his eyes shut at the pleasure he elicited from their teasing. She was trembling in his arms, so he stretched out beside her with his long frame and wrapped her fully in his warmth. He pulled the comforter over them both. Christine moaned from the joy of having him next to her and snuggled her nose into his neck. Eric thought she was moaning from the warmth and couldn't understand why she nuzzled him. She was still shaking, causing Eric to be concerned. The storm raged outside and another clap of thunder sounded, hitting a tree in the neighbor's yard. The loud smack caused another scream from Christine, and she wrapped her legs around Eric's hips, pulling him closer to her still. His manhood reacted to this in the usual way, by making its demands known. Eric groaned from the sweet agony that her actions were causing him. She probably had no idea of the torture through which she was putting him. "Make me forget the storm, Eric. Please make me forget," she implored. Eric had no idea. What was he supposed to do? "How, Christine? Tell me." His words were soft and comforting, causing a thrill to run up Christine's spine. She nuzzled his neck and coyly kissed the hot skin she touched. She would just have to show him how to keep her mind off the storm. He smelled like musk and spice, filling her head with images of faraway places and seductive nights. She drank him in with her nostrils and tasted him with her tongue. She ran the very soft tip of her tongue up the length of his neck, causing Eric to be the one trembling. He raised his chin, allowing her greater access to his neck. She eased her lips over his jawline and slowly fluttered her tongue around the outer edge of his luscious mouth. He knew she was only doing this to forget the fear that raced through her, but Eric was going to enjoy all that she offered him, if only for a moment. Her lips firmly claimed his in a passionate kiss. The fear in her had turned into something else, something far more powerful: desire. She moved over his mouth with expert tenderness and seductive technique. She darted her tongue over his lips, begging for entrance into his warmth. The move forced a moan from Eric, making his mouth open to her beckoning tongue. She wrapped her tongue around his, causing him to grind his throbbing erection into her womb. She moved her hands over his powerful chest, feeling the satin of his nightshirt and knowing that she wanted it off him. She deftly worked the buttons with her fingers as she worked his mouth with her tongue. Eric hadn't even realized she was undoing his shirt until he felt her hands explore his heated flesh. She kept his mouth busy with the thrust of her tongue and caused ripples of pleasure through him with the feel of her hands on his chest. She tickled him with her feather-light touch, a seductive, playful tickle that caused his already engorged erection to expand even more. He was losing this battle, and he was not sure she was aware of that. Her wet little tongue left his mouth and crept down toward his chest. Eric hissed as a brand new sensation ripped through him. His body was on fire with desire, and he wasn't completely confident in his ability to stop. If he could have read Christine's mind, he would have found that she wanted things to progress to that point. She was enthralled with his body, his feel, his smell, his touch, everything. How had he become such a great kisser? His body was formed perfectly, and it molded to hers as if it had been created with her in mind. She lightly, teasingly ran her tongue over an erect male nipple, causing Eric to hiss and buck beneath her. His hands were on her hips, forcing her onto his huge erection. He moaned as she massaged his nipples with her tongue and hands. He writhed beneath her and knew he would expel his seed into his clothing if things did not stop now. He had never been exposed to this powerful pleasure before. He had never pleasured himself, choosing to push his sexuality to the depths of his being and never face its irritating pull. "Christine," a voice beseeched. Eric knew it was his voice, but the raspy, passion-filled sound was foreign to him. "Christine, we must stop." He gently pulled her off his chest and sat up. "You are not fully aware of what you are doing, and I cannot allow this to continue, or I may do something we'll both regret when the sun shines." Her disappointed, stricken eyes focused on his gorgeous features. "Eric, the storm has subsided. I will stay here with you if you want, but I will sleep on top of the covers," he stated, as though making negotiations for a contract. Christine accepted his terms, but she heard the disappointment in his voice. He had been completely engrossed in their passionate foreplay, every bit as much as she had been. Christine smiled as she turned over in her bed and wrapped her arms around him. She thanked the Lord for a thunderstorm that may very well have been a turning point in her marriage. To be continued.